as always, it's the quality of the writing, and you rarely read scripts as good as this. I don't, anyway. And I thought it was totally original and very, very pertinent and very topical and prescient and all the rest of it. And the most amazing central character of this girl. And I liked the idea that it was a sort of three-hander, really, with these enormous themes of loss and loneliness and the whole terrorist aspect, what's happening in the world. It's wonderful, and it's very different, and you realise you sort of get an insight into what a brilliant job Sharon and Chris Cleave have done transforming it into a screenplay, and it must be, the novel's wonderful, but quite different, and the screenplay is only an impression of a novel, and the novel was so unwieldy and big, Novels just are, I think, and the screenplay has to be, even if you mess around with the time frames, it has to be contained into an hour and a half, whatever it is, and you have to be able to tell a story and give it acts and all the rest, so they've done a brilliant job. And it seems to have it has its own identity very much, and the book does too. It's a sort of different, separate identity, but yeah, it's wonderful. It was published on the day of the London bombings, which was a shame for the book, I think. What's interesting in the storytelling is the people and how they cope, and what they do to each other. And the terrorism is the backdrop. That's the sort of catalyst. But the human story is what's interesting, I think. Sharon, she's very she's great. She's a great confidence giver. She's sort of you don't feel like you've got to get it right. It feels very relaxed, and I'm sure they're up against it with time and everything, but I don't feel like that when I'm on set at all. She's lovely. She's very sympathetic. I kind of wanted to be a bit older and feel a bit less. Yeah, he's probably older than I am. Certainly older than I am. But that's the nice thing about being an actor. You can sort of change the way you're seen, or that you appear to be. And he's probably a very, very distant relative of. I wanted to get away from the Tom Quinn spooks idea of a sort of security person. He's not like that. He's different. I think I find a little bit more out about them the more the more scenes you do, and the more you work on it. It's a sort of I don't have a plan when I kind of just jump in and see what comes out when you start working. It's sort of quite shocking and appalling because you realise how much he knows about the explosion at the football stadium, and you're also aware. I find him very sympathetic, and not so at the same time. It was very interesting, and he's sort of falling for this young mother. I think his marriage has collapsed. He seems like a sort of lonely, bruised sort of guy. He's married to his job. He loses his wife asks him to move out. He's living in a travel lodge, and he sort of falls in love with this young woman who he feels, and it's terribly complicated because he feels attracted to her and sort of responsible for the state she's in, responsible for what happened to her little boy and her husband. I think caravanning is a good, decent, healthy pastime. It's quite green, isn't it? Don't leave a great big carbon footprint caravanning. Unless, of course, unless you ship your caravan. Or you have one of those great big Winnebago things. No, but Terence likes caravans. Yeah, I like that about him. I find that very funny. I find it quite endearing, actually. He talks about being able to shut the caravan door and feeling safe. Michelle's got this vulnerability, and her character is terribly vulnerable and terribly damaged, and I think that's what attracts the men. I think people identify with it, and she's a young working class mum from the East End, and her life has been, blown apart by this bomb. And it's the letter to Osama bin Laden, which is which is a very sort of, and it's quite funny and bleak and all the rest of it. It's interesting. I think I think people will be interested in. I mean, it's happened in London. It's happened in. It's not just a sort of. It affects everyone's lives, doesn't it now?